Hey, hey, and welcome back to The Good, the Bad, and the Techy, a podcast all about leading edge technology. I'm VP of Research at GigaOm, Jon Collins.
And I'm CTO and lead analyst Howard Holton.
Thank you, Howard. And this week, with an intro to second to none, we'll try and cut through the jargon and give you what you need to make sense of it all. And this week, we're really excited to talk about security. Howard, you're just back from RSA. Lots of really interesting things going on. Lots of vendors saying the usual stuff. Lots of end users trying to understand how to make sense of it all. So maybe we'll be discussing that.
At some point, I'll figure out when that role is supposed to happen. It just always sounds like I'm kicking it over to Howard for a response. No.
We were doing so well.
John is doing his job and pausing for our little intro roll, and I just start talking.
We've
awesome.
got this.
We'll figure it out. So I did. I came back from RSA. We've got a blog that should be published by the time this video goes live, or relatively close. And it really, like, after writing the blog, of course, I had this realization that I think there's 4 conversations that are happening in security. And it may not be 4 conversations, may not be the right way to put it, right? It may be that there are 4 parties talking, and they're not talking together, right? Like, that may be a better way to put it. And the first, I think, is the vendors, right? The companies that are producing security products. They're kind of having one conversation driven by a combination of what they see attackers doing, and what they're capable of solving within their own kind of technology space and creation kind of zone, right? And they do really interesting things, and it's all technology based, and that's where we get a lot of the kind of technology for technology's sake kind of focus and thinking. In some ways, right? In some ways, software development is art. In which case, especially when you're doing something that is new and innovative, you kind of have to let the artist drive the outcome, right? Even if you have a goal in mind, you may start with a perfect plan, and then as you get into it, the artist has drift and goes, "Hey, I couldn't do that, but I did this instead," or "Hey, this thing we thought would be neat and interesting, this thing is more neat and interesting," right? You kind of get a different result.
I'm racking my. There's a massive connection, but there's probably 1,000 connections between the art of software development and all that, and the kind of the attack surface language and the kind of zero trust and very kind of structured
right
descriptions we apply to security.
Well, I think that leads us to the second party in the conversation, and that is the framework component, right? The NIS and meter or MITRE of the kind of world, right? Where they look at it from an academic standpoint and say, hey, if we're going to categorize all of these things and quantify all of these things, that's not an art. It can't be art. It has to be as pure science as you can get, and very academic. Well, that already creates disconnect number 1, which is why it always feels like if I want to do NIST or if I want to do MITRE, I'm kind of shoehorning products, because no product is made to address MITRE section 5.2. Right? It's afterwards that you go, well, this thing addresses these things within the frameworks. The frameworks aren't built in concert with the vendors and with the vendors in mind. And I don't really think they should be. But then the third party,
5.2 is one of my favorite sections, by the way, of MITRE.
Ooh, it's a sexy section, I do have to say.
I just love it.
Now, 5.5, that's what I read if I want to fall asleep quick.
I mean, who doesn't? My wife actually asks me to read it to her. Just give me 5.5 again. At least I think that's what she says.
One more time, honey. Just one more time. But then you have the third party that enters the conversation, which is in many ways the most difficult party. It's the insurance companies, because their focus is not directly on protection. It's not directly on defending against attackers. It's on mitigating their risk with their customer base and quantifying their risk with their customer base, right? And so while, yes, the side effect of that, or the direct effect of that, is they want you, their customer, to be more safe and secure, their goal really is to make money on an insurance product, and the way they make money is to well, effectively not pay it. And that doesn't mean that they're devious in any way. It just means they come at it from a different angle, right? Now, the side effect should be that their customers are better protected, but it just doesn't always work that way because they speak a slightly different language because they have a very different motivation in that speech. And then the fourth, seemingly wandering in from the cold, shivering and trying to catch up to the conversation, is the end user customer. Right? The people that are actually putting this stuff into play, that are getting value from it. All of us are end users.
Not as in me, but as in, I remember these people over here going, hello.
Yes, yeah. And it's kind of like being an introvert at a high school party or a college party, right? I'm sure we can all remember back to that. Especially if you're an introvert, right? You're kind of the nerdy person sitting in the corner. This was definitely me. I took bartending classes so that I could bartend at those parties, so that I was able to have conversations and not be the weird guy standing in the corner anymore.
It took me so long to realize, and I wish I'd realized it back then, that DJs are essentially the nerdy guy that realized that if he was the DJ, he could get. They're not the coolest people, but they look like the coolest people when you're young. Yeah. What a trick!
They wear that's why I bartended, because the bartender wears the uniform of the coolest person at the party, and the DJ is the only person cooler than the bartender.
This stuff should be written down,
right? But you can't. You can't tell a teenager anything, so it doesn't.
Well, that's true. Hire a teenager while they know everything. Yep, absolutely.
But that's kind of how it feels as a customer, right? Is you kind of walk in and you kind of stumble from conversation to conversation, trying to find a place where you fit in, and ultimately, when it's all said and done, you're the one paying for the party, right?
So you've kind of added two extra, because there's always been the vendor end user relationship. That's the kind of top and tail, and you've added these two. I need to get it on screen. You've added these two side to side instigators as well. So the framework definers, yeah, I get that. They kind of, who doesn't like a methodology? Who doesn't like sitting down and drawing pictures? Well, I do. But the insurance company one is really interesting. So I'll jump over what you said, which is, the goal is not to pay out, and you do end up with this kind of dichotomy of insurance, of kind of making the product saleable and then making the product profitable, which is interesting. But then equally, because they're the mathematicians, they're the actuarial part of things. And while security is really difficult to quantify, I'm just wondering, surely they're the ones that should know, or should be able, if they're hiring the best mathematicians in the world, to get a handle on the thing that no one else can.
No, the data set's not well enough known, would be the way that I would phrase it.
Okay.
Think about all of the things, all of the triggering events that go into a breach, right? Now, again, we're only talking about those things that trigger a cyber insurance payout, right? And so the deductibles are insanely high, right? For individuals, they're insanely high. For corporations, they're probably not, right? But figure $150,000 might be a low deductible in reality. Right. And so the insurance company is only going to pay out once it eclipses $150,000 in cost to the organization, $250,000. Right. And organizations also have to consider, do we actually want to trigger insurance even if it's close to that number? Right. Let's say by the time we're all done doing the math internally, it costs us, $225,000, and our deductible is $150,000. Is it really worth submitting, knowing that one of two things is going to happen? Well, yeah, one, maybe two things is going to happen. Our insurance premiums are absolutely unequivocally going to go up, and our insurer may choose not to renew us. Right. And the third is, we're absolutely going to be asked to invest a lot more money in our security posture. Right. Which insurance isn't going to pay for. So, so there's a big conversation there, and that means a number of incidents don't get reported, right? The cascading effect of the incidents, right? A number of incidents get self-investigated, right? In which case you may or may not find the root cause. even if you hire an investigative team, they may or may not find the root cause themselves, right? So there's all these variables that go into trying to figure out what happened, how did it happen, who got in, what damage did they do, and I'm not certain. I've gone through these. I'm not certain that the insurance company gets all the data, knows what to do with all the data, and has the proper data science components necessary to really kind of do the math.
So
And most of them
they're,
don't have investigators themselves.
they're not getting a clear picture because they're only given half of the story. They're only seeing the things that they're allowed to see because they're the only claims that are made. It's back to the thing about no one ever admits security breaches unless they have to. So they're not getting the rest of the picture from that point of view. And then even if they were, there's the distortion effect. So however good your mathematicians are, distortion effect of premiums versus payouts.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's also a question of how do I quantify the value of we'll call it a checkbox, right? So on my questionnaire, I have my insurance company questionnaire. I have a whole list of things. Do you do this? How do you do this? Do you do this? How do you do this? Do you do this? How do you do this? Right? How do I quantify the specific value of that thing in a way that's able to truly be authoritative, where I could turn that around and turn it into a specification? Right. And the questions today are fairly vague because I don't believe they have the math to do it. How do you protect your endpoints? And then you give an essay of how you protect your endpoints. What do you do about logging? And you give an essay about how you do logging. Right. So they're not. And I think any attempt to try to be specific with it would just fail because again, we're not really able to quantify the value of all of the things that we do. Like one of the things I find interesting is there is a fantastically easy and relatively cheap, especially when we're talking about security tool that I see very few customers using. That I just am not seeing leveraged, and that is secure DNS services.
So what's that?
It's effectively an attempt to do DNS over HTTPS, and effectively, anytime you're communicating over the public internet, to use a DNS provider that has a security focus. And we wrote a report on it, and there's about 15 things that they do from a feature functionality standpoint to improve security on DNS. Things like if you mistype a domain, they reroute you to the proper domain. Right. So if you type YAHO, not that I've been to Yahoo in about 40 years, it sends you to Yahoo rather than someone who may be domain squatting on a typo.
Right. Yeah.
Right. They'll black hole hundreds of thousands of domains that are known to be, bad or untrustworthy domains. Some of them will do domain inspection, right? So they add a lot of security to try to prevent anything from man-in-the-middle attacks to domain squatting attacks to the results of some phishing scams, that sort of thing, right? Effectively, if I can't get to it through DNS, I just can't get to it. It also has the add-on effect of they have the ability to block a lot of bots were they to choose to do so, right? So if they're aware of a botnet, they can block all of the host names for that botnet, and then the traffic doesn't go anywhere, right? So if someone
DNS plus blacklisting plus
if you wanted to run something at home that gave you some of those features, you could run Pi-hole. Right?
I've heard of that. Yep.
Right. So Pi-hole is effectively a custom DNS server that has an enormous blacklist, just enormous blacklist. Very easy to run at home, very easy to manage. You can run it on a Raspberry Pi. It's kind of awesome. If you're one of those people that has a bunch of unused cloud credit, you could run it in the cloud and then use it everywhere. It's fantastic.
I certainly have a bunch of unused Raspberry Pis. So.
That's true. It's true. So, but I think I think there's this really interesting kind of thing that's happening, right? And so as a customer, right, you hear from the end user, you hear from the vendor, and the vendor tells you one story, and you hear from the framework company, and they tell you another story, And then you're bombarded once a year or twice a year or 4 times a year by your insurance company with probably the most stressful document you have to do every year. And then it's this kind of endless cycle of, 3 conversations occurring that you as the end user kind of have to be able to follow and stitch back together. And ultimately it's frustrating. And when we think about why companies aren't doing things like DNS security, as an example, right? It's because they're just exhausted.
Mm.
That's all. I mean, forget about it. They've exhausted their budgets, right? Let's say I have $100 million a year budget for security, right? And I spend $100 million. I am convinced I don't spend all of it as well as I could or as well as I should, but I'm exhausted by being bombarded by everyone telling me they have the solution for everything,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because that's the other problem, right? Everybody says they're the solution for everything, except the insurance company. The insurance company doesn't say they solve everything, right? But the framework companies are like, no, this is what you need to do, and they're very slow. They just are. They're very slow because that's what they, it takes forever to ratify changes. So they're not really up to date with everything that's happening within the security space. And then you have the vendors who are a little bit faster, but also, sell by architecture.
So, is there any good news at the end of this for
Um,
India?
Actually, the good news is the last few years in security, RSA and Black Hat have changed. Like every year, the message has been very different, right?
Mm-hmm.
This year, the message was kind of more of the same. There was nothing new message wise. Now, I think that's going to change for Black Hat this year. I fully expect to come back from Black Hat hearing AI everywhere. But RSA was kind of more of the same. And if there was one thing I'd really be looking at right now, today, literally, it's expect the phishing attacks to get a whole lot more mature overnight. Right. One of the great ways we were able to identify phishing attacks was from their poor use of grammar. Right. Especially phishing attacks that come out of non-native English speaking countries attacking English speaking, with English based attacks. But generative AI makes that a non-issue. Right. And so we need to, that would be the thing that I would really be paying attention to right now, today. Otherwise, no, nothing else new. Pay attention to the same stuff we paid attention to before, right? Ransomware.
That kind of gives an opportunity to really glib, to mature, to kind of solidify, to learn more about. If nothing's changing all the time, you can just get better at the stuff that's staying the same, which has been half the problem.
Well, and there's plenty to do, right? The big thing vendors are worried about is companies not having as much money as they did last year. A reduction in spend. So, if I was still running a security team at an enterprise, what I would do is I would focus on contract negotiation. Right. I'd look at, do I have the ability to consolidate some things? Do I have some vendors with overlap where I can leverage some of that? And kind of, like if I were to drop a vendor, can I put that spend into a relationship I have that's existing that gives me that overlap? And I think if I were to do that, I could probably spend my dollar as though it was a $1.75 or $2 with each of those vendors, because they're all expecting a contraction, right? And so giving someone a larger piece of your wallet share in this market gives you a far better negotiating position, which is frankly is gold.
And I think I'm right in saying that, I mean, vendors are consolidating as well, maybe slower than we'd like, but there's some acquisition. There was more acquisition starting to happen last year, but then with the Silicon Valley downturn, for want of a better term, that maybe has slowed a bit. But there are possibly fewer throats to choke.
Yeah, I think we're going to see that pick up. Like generally, when money gets hard, it affects the VC community faster than it affects the enterprise community, right? Like Cisco still has deep pockets, and their pockets aren't really getting any shallower enough for us to measure. Versus if you were to start a new security company today, while you'd be in a really good position compared to starting an infrastructure company today, you're going to find Cisco's ability to get their hands on some cash and do some acquisitions is going to be easier. We're also likely to see an increase in acquisitions by companies that weren't interested in being acquired, that were holding out, that are just simply running out of cash to operate.
Mm.
Right? And
it becomes
so
a buyer's market or an acquirer's market.
very much has become a buyer's market, and will kind of continue to through 2023 for sure. I think if business doesn't start to see a drop off in revenues, which I'm not seeing any real serious ones recorded so far, that shouldn't have been predicted, I guess. Then we'll start to see money start to become cheap a little bit. And the Fed has said that they're not looking at really lowering interest rates until 2024 at this point.
So in the meantime, I kind of I'm thinking about the so what to do side of things from the end user perspective, and having read the blog, which makes my life easier, right? I'm trying to skills.
Yeah.
Have you got any thoughts on that, Howard?
Yeah, I would invest in skills. I would
Yeah,
heavily invest
really?
in
There you go.
upskilling my teams. Find as much breathing room as you can this year. Like one of the things I like about times when money is tough is when money is easy to get, it's almost thrown at me to get things done. Right? And then everybody goes, well, money is tight, so what do we need just to keep things running? Right? What do I need to give you just to keep the lights on? And what that means is the expectation isn't going to be for me to do 40 new projects, right? And even the ability to sweat some of my assets, which means keep them longer than I had initially planned, gives me the ability to better think about what the architecture needs to look like, and gives me the time to focus on workforce improvements, operational efficiencies, and redesigns to eliminate technical debt. Right? It's very hard to do when money is cheap, because the expectation is you're going to be doing all these projects, and it's kind of a frantic pace. Well, if money slows down, then I can also set the expectation that, hey, I'm going to take the time, I'm going to invest in my people, because those same people that work on projects aren't going to have the same projects. Let's invest in them. Let's get them some courses. Let's get them some classes. Let's get them some training. I'm going to invest in operational efficiencies. Hey, where can we improve our op model to take advantage of some of these new things, and really kind of advance ourselves that way, and then a reduction in technical debt.
I guess that there's a whole bunch of positives there, including, if you can't throw more people at it, so invest in your people. But then that gets to the contradiction that training budgets are often one of the first things to go. So maybe don't lose your training budget. But something you said in the blog was that it's about cross training as well. So it's not just about trying to make everyone the best security engineer or the best software developer. It's about giving security skills to software people, and possibly the other way around as well.
It is. I think there's also an opportunity. Like, the budget doesn't go away; it just gets heavily trimmed. And with training budgets, one of the things that I would do is make sure you understand what your organization has for a training budget, because the last couple organizations that I've been at, there's been this real shift into investing in people, and that means there's been a conversation held at the executive level where HR has workforce training budgets, and then we have, within our business units, we also have training budgets, and those get cut at very, very different rates. Right? Those get talked about very, very differently, and so often, like, the HR budget would go to something like a Pluralsight or a Udemy, right? Some large kind of training plan, where my budget would go to things like RSA and Black Hat, right? Or week-long boot camps, those sort of things, right? The kind of larger snap investments. And so I'd really think about, can I leverage a relationship with a training provider, right? A Coursera, Pluralsight, Udemy, Masterclass, whoever, right? Or if I have no budget whatsoever, right? Can I leverage some of the free content on YouTube and and do lunch and learns, right? Can I cater lunch for the team? Everybody's in the room, and we do a 1 hour, we do 45 minutes of or an hour of training by a YouTuber. There's so much free content, and yes, it requires effort, and it means someone has to kind of curate and create a plan and create a strategy. But the days of needing a huge IT budget to get any training value, those are long gone. It is far easier and it is far more effective. Like I can send someone for a 1 week boot camp, and the value that I get out of it is one, they're immersed, and two, they come back with all sorts of new ideas. Right? I love to send people that are kind of bored or calcified to 2, 3, 4, 5 day trainings, because they come back reinvigorated.
I'm going to throw a third one in, which is it's the analyst trick that we talked about before, using practitioners and being practitioners. But it's walking in other people's shoes, so if you send a software person to a networking course, the language is not only the language is so different, but the whole kind of ethos is so different, and they go, you guys think like that. I get it, or they don't get it, but at least they get the experience of it. And then the dialogue between the two sides, if you're troubleshooting or something like that, just becomes
agreed.
It not necessarily troubleshooting is always hard, or it's often hard. So not necessarily, we can just solve any problem in the world now, but at least you have that channel. You've widened that kind of communications channel.
It's being able to speak the same language that makes such a big difference, right? And even if I highly recommend DevOps engineers take classes similar to Network Plus or the CCNA as an example. You don't have to get certified. Like I probably wouldn't bother, especially if you're a DevOps person. But being able to speak the language, being able to understand the fundamentals of how the network works, is going to help you so much in communicating with teams that today you probably don't communicate terribly well with. Right? It'll make you seem more like an ally. That does not mean you get to go in and pretend to be the expert because you took a class, right? But it does mean you can use the language and work far more collaboratively. Then it'll feel a lot less like you're tossing things over the fence, which all of us get blamed for, even when we do not intend to do so. Right? Being able to communicate is a valuable skill, and the best way to do that is to just learn the basics of the terms and operations so that you can do so.
100%. So I've got to get this out of my head, because I was thinking when you were talking about AI, I was thinking Old MacDonald had a ChatGPT AI. So sorry, I've said it now, and it's out there in the world, and I can move on with my life.
Now stuck in my head.
my day is complete, if not my week and my life. So are there any takeaway thoughts for organizations? We're squaring this square between interestingly, you were talking about different that blocks and whole thing where you're trying to bang a square into the cross or things like that. So these shapes matter, I think, is the important takeaway there. But so any other takeaways for people?
Look for opportunities to invest in your people and reduce technical debt. Right? Now is an especially good time to invest in your people, and really focus on workforce morale. We've been fighting in security for 5-ish years just to retain people. Right. And in many cases, that's made us unwilling to invest to the level that we probably should have, because we make someone more appealing to their next employer. But now is the time to do that. The number of job recs is simply down. The job openings are simply down. That's not going to stay that way. And so your options are, you can take advantage of people and just be like, hey, you don't have a choice, and therefore you have to work for me. That's a terrible idea, although I see it happening. It's a horrible idea. It reinforces everything that every employer has complained about since the start of COVID, in the people don't want to work and the great resignation. And the way you combat that is make people like where they're at and feel validated and valuable. And the way you do that is to invest in them, invest your time, invest your energy, and invest some of the company's budget into improving their skills and improving their morale.
So less is more, and the truth is inside, even though we're all outside now. Which isn't. I don't think that's an oxymoron. I think that's absolutely true. It's about embracing the people that you've got wherever they are. Awesome. Well, thank you, Howard.
Thanks, Jim.
You get to do the outro, so I'll leave you on that.
I do. So this has been another the good, the bad, and the techie. We certainly hope that you learn something, and at the very least, we inspired some sort of thought, comment, or reaction. In which case, please leave it for us. If you have a topic you'd like to hear us talk about, or just want to connect with us in general, you can find us on all the various social media locations. And we look forward to your comments, and hopefully you'll stick with us week over week. Thank you, and have a great day.